Welcome to the podcast, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time, a CASOurce production. In this episode, I chat with Jeff Gaura, coach, trainer, and founder of the Threshold Academy. This episode exists because of CASOurce. CASOurce is your content team. You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? That's what we do. Content strategy, creation, and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CASOurce, we exist to help you create and share amazing content. And yes, you should have a podcast. We'll help you. Learn more by visiting CAScontent.com. Jeff is also a published author. On October 20th, 2020, Jeff's book, Behind the Secrets in the Fall of Jerusalem, was released on Amazon. Check the show notes for a link to this book. Jeff transforms lives by challenging perceived limits and conquering them. He realizes he will never arrive at the perfect diet and fitness regimen, but he is here to tell you about his journey. And that's what this episode is about. Jeff sharing his stories so we can cross our own thresholds. And with that, we welcome Jeff Gaura. Jeff, I was hearing this story that I don't know if you were on a trip or if you were in a race, but you ended up in the hospital, right? I think it was up near Asheville. And from what I understand, you were having conversations with our team. You were talking to John Priori here about business, about things, about content, about the next thing. And you're sitting in the hospital. Take us back a little bit to what led you to the big wreck that you had up near Asheville.
Sure. So I like to consider myself an athlete, even though I never make a lot of money doing it, but I do get to compete at the highest of levels on the global stage. And one of my events is cycling. And as a cyclist, you have different skills you have to practice. And one of them is learning how to descend down a mountain like a bat out of hell. You only got about a square inch of rubber in contact with your front wheel and a square inch of rubber in contact with your rear wheel. So you really don't have the freedom to screw up like a motorcyclist might or a car driver might. So I was descending on Highway 215 off of the Blue Ridge Parkway, descending toward Canton. And it was a descent I've done many times before. I've used it when I've been training for races in the Alps. And I felt like I knew the road well. Well, there's this one specific bend where, for lack of a better phrase, I was stupidly not paying attention. There was a woodpecker near some rhododendron on the side of the road. And I thought that was odd. And I stared at this woodpecker. And when I looked up, I was going too fast into this hairpin turn. Hairpin just means it's a 180. It's a 180-degree shift of direction. And I couldn't make it. I couldn't make the turn. I didn't have enough time to brake. So I stopped as best as I could with my rear wheel brakes. My front wheel hit the side of this old stone bridge that went back to CCC construction days. And I just somersaulted rear wheel over front wheel over the edge of the bridge. And I fell down about 30 feet before I hit a riverbed. And I landed on some gravel right next to the river. I held onto my bike as hard as I could because I knew that the frame could absorb some of the shock so long as I landed on the bike. And it kind of went just like it was scripted. I did a couple of somersaults and my front wheel hit first. My forks exploded. The fiber in my forks just blew up and my wheel shot out. And I was holding tight onto my handlebars, but I didn't have the strength to hold my body up. So my chest, specifically the right side of my chest and shoulder, slammed into the handlebars. And I broke all but one rib. So I had at least one. I had one working rib.
Wow.
And I threw my AC joint from here to Kingdom coming back. But my legs and my arms were undamaged because the bike had absorbed so much of the shock. And, after a 30-foot fall, that's kind of incredible. I knew I was going into shock. That was a no-brainer. And I knew there was no way anybody on the road would ever see me. There's no cell coverage, so nobody could trace me. So just sort of a responsive effort. I got off my bike and just climbed. I had one working arm. I couldn't use the shoulder on my right arm. I had one working arm, so I just climbed out from the ravine I was in and just laid down on the side of the road praying that somebody would come. And sure enough, somebody did. They tried to call 911. I couldn't speak because I had an event called a pneumothorax where I blew my right lung's attachment from my rib cage out. So I couldn't really talk or breathe correctly. Every breath was kind of a gasp. So they couldn't give them my name or what was going on, but they could see that I was pretty injured. And I pointed down to my bike so they could see the pile of carbon at the bottom there. I tried to call 911. They had no success. So they flagged 2 different cars that were on the road. One sent up the mountain to try to get a signal from up on the parkway, and the other they sent down in the valley to see if they could find a signal. Well, lucky for us, down in the bottom of the valley was an ambulance that was pulled over waiting for its next call. So the ambulance came and picked me up, and they put me on the cart and gurney and shoveled me off to hospital number 1. Hospital number 1 took some x-rays and said, "You got too many broken bones for us. We got to send you to hospital number 2. So I got right back in that same ambulance, got double billed, of course, and they took me to hospital number 2. Hospital 2 looked at the x-rays from hospital 1 and said, yeah, we're going to have to put you in the trauma unit. Oh, by the way, because of COVID, we've had to merge the trauma unit with another unit for people who are experiencing substance abuse. So during those 3 or 4 days I was there, I was in rooms with people going through detox and tremors and stuff like that. There was one guy who I think was handcuffed to his bed, who was a few doors down from me. Because during my 4 days in that trauma room, because everybody else, in general, if you go through a car wreck or something and you're in one of these wards, you don't have the ability to walk. Well, everything from my waist down was totally normal. So I was walking around a lot during the day to pass the time and talking to people as much as I could. And trying to focus on things that were, I'm going to call somewhat normal real world stuff. So calling up John Priori or texting him and chatting with him was just one of the many things I did to try to distract my mind from the fact that I'd just gone through a life-threatening trauma. It's interesting, when I went through PTSD therapy afterwards, when I was telling the counselor that I was reliving the event about once an hour, she was sharing with me some of the good ideas, bad ideas. And she said, just pretending it didn't happen would not have been good. But the idea that you were talking to people and telling them about it as best as you could, as much as your lungs could do, it was actually very restorative and very healing. So talking to John was actually part of my healing process, if you can believe that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. There's so much. That's an unbelievable story. I mean, because you hear about the accident, you hear that he's in the hospital, and then you have this, you fill in the gaps in so many different places. Because one of my first questions is when you're talking, I'm thinking to myself of, wow, what it must have been like for these other people that were cycling with you to have watched you take this fall. Well, as it turns out, there was nobody there. The only person there was the car that eventually came out, but they couldn't have seen you had you not made your climb to get where you needed to go. So maybe somebody could see you. Mm-hmm. And then like more cars driving by. And like you said, to get to these points. And that is a scary moment, but you relive it like you just talked about in having the PTSD therapy to where, well, what do you do from here? Because there's so many things that happen. It's almost like you explained it in slow motion, but I don't know, you tell me, the time between you realizing that you're not going to make it, like this fall is going to happen, this spill is going to happen, mm-hmm. between it actually like you lying there on the ground, like when you were first like landed, how much time was that? Seconds, milliseconds?
Well, I mean, I got a degree in physics. I can do a ballistics calculation for you.
Yeah.
So I would say before I hit, I came to peace with my life, and I just called out the name of Jesus. I didn't have any other words to go with it. I just called out his name. And as I was going through the air, dealing with just a physiological response of gripping my bike and following my training, because everybody knows when you get into heavy stress, you always fall back onto whatever your training was. And I just fell back into my training. I basically said, if this is the moment, I'm good with that. I mean, I didn't use words,
sure,
but I thought, if this is my calling moment, if this was the last thing I do on earth, I'm okay with that. I've been a successful dad. I've been a successful husband. I've been a successful businessman. I run a nonprofit. I've been a great athlete. I've done 7 world championships. If this is it, okay, I'm going a few years ahead of the curve that the mathematicians at the insurance companies calculate, but I was okay with it. I had a peace about it. Mm-hmm. So when I landed and stood up, I was like, wow, this is great. I am hurting, but this is great. I'm still alive.
Yeah. The risk that you have going into this, I mean, from what I also understand is this wasn't your first wreck. I don't know if this was your worst wreck.
No, I had I was doing a race in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. It was right on the border. And I was cruising through a town going really fast, an aerodynamic position. And we went through this small town, and they had pulled a permit for us to be able to race on this road in small town Pennsylvania. And the citizens there perceived that they were not spectators in a sport, but still perceived they had rights as a pedestrian. Because, everybody confuses pedestrian versus spectator. Well, this one old man with his granddaughter was walking across the road, and I yelled at him to stop, stop, stop. Well, the old man literally stepped right in front of me when I was at high speed on that road, and I blew his knee replacement to Kingdom Come and back. Of course, he went legally after USA Triathlon for that. And I got really hurt, broke my bike, in fact, basically had to stop racing.
Yeah.
And had a big scar. That was on my anniversary with my wife, if you can believe that. So that,
of course,
correct that. So yeah, part of being a cyclist is you get in wrecks. They don't call them wrecks though. They create what we call our cycling tattoos.
Okay.
So I have tattoos on my back.
Tattoos. Yeah. I could imagine. So
it's chunks of missing skin, but we call them tattoos.
Okay. And talking about this, like you had talked about before, the PTSD, talking about what took place, that's the therapy, right? Like reliving that moment. I've heard, in PTSD in those examples, like going back to the scene of the accident. Is that something that you've done for the accident that happened up in the Blue Ridge?
No, but I'm sure I will.
Okay.
In fact, I almost did when I was cycling the Blue Ridge Parkway a few months ago with my family.
Mm-hmm.
When you go through a traumatic experience, right, it's a psychotic event and that your reality shifts, but chemically, my brain was different. Like there were new proteins forcefully created during that wreck between my ears that probably would not otherwise have ever been created, right, on a physiological level. But I had to come to terms with the fact that the person who walked away from that wreck was not the same person who went into that wreck. My character changed. My personality changed to a certain extent. And my response was going to be, what do I do with that? The PTSD counselors reminded me that if you choose to take out the fact that you'll never be who you used to be, if you start taking that out on your loved ones, it's going to be a problem. It's going to affect you in the most negative of ways. So I feel like I connected more with my family after that wreck to some major extents than before. But I also came to peace with the fact that I'm just not going to be the same person. Like I'm still going through physical therapy. In fact, I went through some yesterday to try to restore my AC joint. I'll never have a normal AC joint in my right shoulder, and I have to work on the supportive tissues probably for the rest of my life. And just coming to peace with that is a part of PTSD counseling. Like if you step on a landmine and you lose your leg, there's a period of time where you're mad that your leg is gone and you now don't get to be locomote like everybody else. And you try to do things to be just like everybody else. But as you come to peace with it, you realize I can't have a goal that matches exactly what I had in the past. I have to evolve my goals to match the new me. So people without legs, they might get a prosthetic, but they might choose to, instead of trying to get back on a bike, to learn how to ride a recumbent bike or learn how to do something different like that. Doesn't mean you lost. It's just like you've changed. It's part of the healing process. Right. It's trauma.
And that's an extreme, like you said, trauma, that's an extreme thing that took place. It's a lot of that is if you don't, you're living in the past. And when you're living in the past and you're trying to accomplish these goals that you had set out from before, well, things have changed. And those things could be something minor to, like you said, a traumatic experience. And it seems to me you are constantly moving forward. Like you're lying in a hospital bed, no doubt. It's part therapy. It's part to get your mind onto something else. It's also part taking those small steps to move forward, to get in those conversations.
Yeah, action does more to deal with anxiety for me than anything. Action unwinds anxiety like nothing for me. It's like number one.
Yeah. But you're not disguising it, because a lot of times there's these activities you can do something to overcome anxiety, but you're just doing tasks. And maybe that's a good thing. You're showing progress. You're showing like you're not just doing the activity just to do it. Like you have purpose. You clearly have purpose. And then you're sharing these stories. I mean, you're on this podcast today talking about this and reliving this. And I appreciate it because these are the stories we need to hear. And it seems to me that you're doing this for all of those reasons that we've discussed, for the therapeutic aspects of it. But also it's part of your creation process of talking and writing. And you wrote a book. You tell these stories and I'm listening. I'm here for the story. I'm listening to it. Mm-hmm. If you wrote it, I'd be here and I'd be reading the story and I'd be captivated by it. And I want to know what takes place and what emotions I might be feeling as I read or listen. Is that a big reason why you wanted to just start putting stuff down, for example, on an audio recording or on paper?
I would say that plays a role that I can't measure with words, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell you, I have a passion to see people overcome mediocrity. And it's been that way since I've been a Boy Scout. When a young boy would enter our troop when I was the patrol leader, and I would be given the task of mentoring him on the basics of how to set up a tent, how to build a fire, and things like that. Well, that still goes on today. My whole new business, everything I do right now, if I had to bring it down to what is it that I want to see people do above all things with this new business, most businesses, they all say, I want people to make money. I want them to have these additional services and revenue. I don't need to make money. I mean, I sold my business. I was smart with the money that I did have, and my requirement of making a lot of money per year in order to make ends meet, I don't have that requirement. My kids are up and grown. My youngest is in college, but he's on a scholarship. So I don't have to do the traditional things of pay off a house, because I already did that, or save for college or save for retirement. So I was able to check all those boxes by the time I was, 51, 52. But I love watching people overcome mediocrity. I love meeting somebody who doesn't perhaps have a clue about who I am or what I've done, but I hear their passion to overcome whatever adversity they've gone through. I had a woman who dealt with a husband who had a serious drug overdose issue, and she needed to do something for her. So I loved helping her train for and prepare to do her first half Ironman. Because to go from a middle-aged school teacher dealing with the shame of having a husband who had drug issues to crossing a finish line at a national championship and doing okay. She didn't suck it up. She did okay in that race. That was about as fulfilling for me as there is on planet Earth. Or seeing somebody scared to death to go hike in the Himalaya, have them trust me and say, you can do this. Take a kid. I had a 12-year-old boy in a raft with me in Western Alaska for day after day in some pretty treacherous conditions, and he thrived. It wasn't that he just survived. He loved it. He's looking back on his Alaska time saying, that was great. I love seeing bear and moose and eagles and catching salmon that weighed about half as much as me.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So I love watching people overcome mediocrity.
Yeah.
But concurrent with that, my heart breaks when I see people set goals that are mediocre. When I see that their goal in life is to just get a good job with more pay and everything will be okay kind of mentality. I want to see people overcome that mediocrity. And that makes me write. That makes me coach. That makes me get out there and try really hard, and as a runner and multi-sport athlete or whatever I'm doing.
Yeah. I can see it. I want, for anyone who's listening to this, Jeff, I've seen you mentor people in our organization. We've already named one person, John Priori, and you're not easy on people, but it's with purpose, like you've talked about, and you want to continue to push people. So you're a client. I mean, let's say that, right? You're a client of our company, of our content marketing company, but you're also a mentor to people in the company. And you don't see that a lot. And we always talk about the opportunity that you might have when you get to talk to these people. So if someone works for us and they have an opportunity to work with someone like yourself, Jeff, they have an opportunity not only to help you, but to help themselves, to get mentored if they give back, right? If there's a good relationship. Like you hear it a lot, right? You hear people are out there and they want to help people, and that's great. And they probably do. But it's different when we get to see it live and in person on a consistent basis. And then I get to have conversations with John, and he can tell me about the things and the excitement that he has. And he met with you, I think, a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. And he was telling me that I love that session. We had a strategy session. And he was so engaged and he was so lively about it and ready to take on whatever next thing was coming. So from that, I say thank you, because I'm thanking you for what he's getting out of it, but our business as well, because it helps all of us. And it's just the right thing to do. And so mentoring is obviously an important thing. And like you said, it's what keeps you going. Because I think that's what happens for a lot of people is we're all going to hit that rut. It's not going to be perfect. You say it, I think it's on your website and you've talked about it. You will never arrive at the perfect diet nor the perfect fitness regimen. You realize that it can't be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. And then when people hit those ruts, they fall off the wagon at whatever it is. They're on a diet and they indulge in cookies or whatever the thing might be. That a lot of times becomes the breaking point. They can't go on anymore, but they don't realize like you're being really hard on yourself. And then why are you doing this? And keep going. And that's why people like you exist. I'm sure there's been breaking points when you're in the Himalayas or you're in a meeting, even just some basic conversation that you're having with someone, not basic, but just a conversation where you're having with somebody that you're reminding them, you're helping them in some way to keep going, to keep pushing through, because it's not easy. You're going to wake up. You're going to be tired. You're supposed to go on a run, but it's freezing outside. What are you going to do? Right? Because it's not all, like they say, sunshine and rainbows. It's just not. You're going to fall off your bike. What are you going to do about it? You're going to be living in the middle. I can't even believe this, but we're living in the middle of a pandemic. And sometimes I asked my son this, and we were out somewhere. I was like, Mason, do you ever just look around and just look, everyone's wearing a mask. This wasn't the way it was. Things are crazy. The restaurant's closed or whatever that might be. Like, what are you going to do about it? But anyway, Jeff, there's obviously a lot there, and you can take that in any direction that you want. But I wanted to say those things because I see it, maybe not live and in person myself, but I hear the stories about what you are doing for other people. And I appreciate that.
So, through the pandemic, we've seen industries rise and fall, right? We've seen, you mentioned them, you mentioned restaurants, anybody that's basically serving in the entertainment industry. We all know what's happening with sports revenue. Who knows what's going to survive in the years to come if this becomes an ongoing issue. But I feel like the stage was beautifully set for me to go hard and heavy as a writer. I've been doing my blog, Thoughts and Training, since 2013. But it seems so easy and natural to just take time that I would otherwise spend in a face-to-face environment and convert that into time I would spend in a screen writing stories. Some of them are real stories and some of them are fiction. I feel like every chance I get to write because of the pandemic is, for me, it's like a blessing. It's a gift. When I pick up a pen or a computer keyboard and I start to write, I kind of start with the same basis that every single person out there has. We have what our senses and our experience have given us, right? We see geese flying south and we are told they're flying south for the winter. And maybe we add poetry to that. Maybe we just see them and say, whatever, I got to keep driving. Or maybe we stare at them and have a conversation about it. Everybody has that as their kind of starting point with their sensory perception on things, right, Eric? So I'm not stopping there. When I see a duck swimming on a pond, and I say this in my book, when I see a duck swimming in a pond and I'm driving down the road, there's a portion of my subconscious, and this is the physicist in me, that says there are two yellow-orange colored feet swimming asynchronously, where one is pushing and the other is pulling, and they're paddling, and he's pushing a force, most of which is propelling him horizontal to the surface of the water, but some of it's vertical. And based on the speed he's going, his legs are going at a different rate. So I'm seeing legs moving under the water where most people just see a white duck sitting on the surface of the water. And that's kind of part of all of us. I mean, every one of us has this story of these things that we see, that they see deeper and further than everybody else. And when I pick up my keyboard and pen and I start writing, I feel like I get a chance to tell those deeper stories. Like within the scriptural framework, some really basic stuff that I can throw out there to everybody. What color was the Good Samaritan? Was he black or white? When Jesus fed the 5,000 and they had all that extra bread, well, what did they do with all that extra bread? Because we don't get any stories about that. When Jesus hiked for 3 days from the coast to Jerusalem, on that 68-kilometer route, as we've measured it out today to be, what did he eat? Where did he get water? He didn't wear Nikes. He wasn't in running shorts. He was in a robe, probably barefoot, maybe had some low-quality sandals. What happened when he stubbed his toe? These are simplistic stuff that we generally don't think about, but if we see them with our eyes, maybe we will ask those kinds of questions. So I feel like the pandemic has given me a chance to explore those kinds of thoughts that I might not have otherwise gotten.
Yeah. Well, it's what happens in between. I've said this, I think, on the last few conversations I've had. It's what happens in between the frames. It's like you just said, the stories, we don't have the stories there. Something took place.
No, you got to make them up.
And you got to make them up. You got to think through it. Your thinking and your stories and all of this stuff is fascinating. And I'm here for all of it. What led to all this? Like, what led to having you have this thought process and coming up with these, I don't know, ideas and stories and pushing your threshold?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. I had a bad experience in English when I was in middle school and high school. Because I've always had high level IQ, I got thrown in all these smart guy classes. But what they didn't realize is that smart guy doesn't necessarily mean interested guy. And I got put in Miss Parrott's 8th grade English 1 class. And that just dispelled any love of writing that I may ever have. It took me 3 decades to get over the negative impact that Miss Parrott had on me throughout these years. And I'm sure she's long since passed away. But that's kind of my writing career. It started in the most negative of circumstances, because where we're supposed to getting it developed, it very much got squashed. I guess in that sense, when I hear how Einstein would get low grades in math, I kind of feel that that's
Yeah.
validation for
Sure.
me that happened. So I start with that negative experience, but I always knew that I had a storytelling side to me. And people who've worked for me over the years have told me, whether I've mentored these people or not, that I seem to be at my best when I'm telling a story. I seem to keep everybody's attention more when I'm telling a story. It's always been my teaching MO. Every time I've taught, I've always based it around storytelling, because stories are the essence of our history. No one is interested in George Washington served in the military for 15 years before he was president. That's boring. They like to hear about crossing the Delaware and False Teeth and building his massive fortress in Mount Vernon. They like to hear stories about those kinds of things. My book I've written, it's the first book in a trilogy. This morning, I was editing chapters 10 and 11 for the second book. So I'm already halfway done with the second book. And I've already got an outline in my head for the third book. And again, this is a thank you pandemic moment, because I probably would have not been this far advanced in the writing had the pandemic not happened.
Yeah. When do you think your first book will be released?
Well, it's available right now. You can get it from Amazon. It's from Barnes and Noble. You can pick it up. Books A Million. I'm working with your John right now about making sure it shows up on Goodreads.
Yep.
I've also got a stash of books myself. And if anybody wants to get one directly from me, you can, and I'll autograph it. But please tell me what to say when I autograph it. Like, don't just say, please autograph my book. Say, Dear Esmelda, thank you very kindly for the fish. Signed, Jeff Gaura.
Right.
I mean, tell me what you want me to
Just
say in there.
anything,
Otherwise, I have to make it up.
Yeah.
That's pretty boring and pretty useless stuff. I also want to go around and talk about it, because I feel like within the Christian space, there's this hesitancy to create fiction because there's multiple references in the Bible about not adding to the Word of God. Well, I'm not adding to words that he spoke, and I want to tell stories about stuff that was glazed over that is of interest to the imaginative mind. I want to take the holes that exist in the story and Dr. Seussify them.
Yeah. Right. And it sounds like during this pandemic, like you used it as an opportunity to hunker down perhaps and just get to writing. What was your process for writing not only this book, like you just said, that's out there, but the next book and then the outline for the next? Like, I mean, this takes time. It takes thinking. It, like, as you know, it's exhausting, but it's obviously it's very therapeutic. It's enjoyable process for you. It's an important process in your life. Like, what was your process a little bit, if you had one, for writing your books?
Sure. So all the authors got their own kind of idea out there. I started with the traditional outline method. I'd love to say that was a great idea, but I think it was one of those methods I got from Miss Parrott back in 8th grade. But I kind of outlined what I thought the flow was going to be. And then, of course, I did not stick to it. But I defined what the end was going to be. And then I would do a chapter at a time. And each chapter started with a sentence, and then I would tie together in paragraphs. I never let myself take a break until I tied up the end of a paragraph and started the next. Because I found that when you walk away from a writing moment and you've just tied up a thought completely and haven't started the next thought, there's no real way to keep going. It's like the offense comes on the field and the plays they call are contingent on how much time is left on the clock and what quarter they're in and what the score is. And I feel like if I don't start the next paragraph, I'm not allowing myself to see what the score is and how much time is left in the game. So I always start a paragraph and leave it undone before I take a break for the day or the hour or the whatever I'm going to go do. So when I sit back down and I open up my writing, I can see where I was going, even if I don't continue going there. I kept getting to these places. I'm going to finish this chapter. I'm going to finish this chapter. And then I'd sit back down again and I ask myself, now what am I going to do? How do I take these characters from what I just finished to where I want to go? And, sometimes I end up deleting an entire chapter, which it hurts because there's a lot of investment that goes into a chapter.
Sure.
But now it's streamlined. I've broken my second book. I've broken it down into 3 distinctly different sections. And I'm already on section number 2. And within each section, I very much have a good idea about what each chapter is about because I'm putting a name on each chapter before I write it. So I can tell myself in advance, this is the end game of this chapter, or this is the end game of the next chapter. So I'm structuring it using some of the old words and strategies that we all learned in school: a paragraph, sentence, chapter, book. But ultimately, I have a goal mechanism, a goal measurement that's not much different than my athletic stuff.
Okay. Prioritized comes to mind because you have a lot of, as we talked about, you have a lot of other things going on. Your fitness, your mentoring, There's so many different things happening and writing a book, right? Like people write books. That's all they do, Jeff. That they don't do anything else. They're just writing the book. Are you blocking off hours of the day, weeks? Are you how are you doing that aspect with everything else you have?
Yeah. So for those who wanted to get really down into it, so I have a color coded calendar, right? So I have yellow for writing. On Sunday evenings, when I plan out my week, I make sure that there's enough yellow on the calendar for the upcoming week such that I can feel comfort that I'm going to be making progress this next week. So if I only have a couple hours of yellow of writing, that's not very good. I like to have big chunks of yellow. If I have a yellow chunk this afternoon, Eric, where I'm going to be doing a bunch of writing, but I also use dark blue for my fitness. And so I'll have times when I'm just working on my fitness. Like when you and I hang up here, I've got an hour run I'm going to do, and then I have to eat a meal and stretch. So between the hour run, eating, stretching, and recovery, that's an entire hour and a half allotment, maybe an hour and 45 minutes I've got to allocate for that entire event. And then I have stuff that I do just with my family. And those are all things that are pink. And I have pink time blocked out on my calendar. And then when I go to my month view, I always have green time. And I like to have 6 weeks of green time a year at the very least. That's travel time. Travel meaning I'm not spending the night in my own house. Preferably, I'm spending the night in another country, but another state is good enough. And I try to get out.
Yeah.
And in the midst of my green, in the middle of the green, there's blue, pink, and yellow. Because I can write when I'm traveling, I can exercise when I'm traveling, and I can spend family time when I'm traveling.
Sure.
So if I got to lump everything together into buckets of stuff that I do, that's what it looks like.
Okay. What happens, because we talked about this before, things happen, right? Like an accident happens, and next thing you know, your week is shot. Something happened. Maybe not a week, maybe an afternoon. Something's going to change. I mean, when your kids are growing up, next thing you know, your kid's sick. Well, that changes some stuff around. I would imagine, because you have good insight for us on how you manage that, where a lot of other people, you get thrown off. You could lose an entire week or entire month, and I was writing this book, but I stopped writing the book because this thing happened and I never got back on track. And there's so many unfinished text out there.
Yeah, there is. When you get sidetracked, I think everybody in the world has to come up with their own strategy for handling that. I used to have one specific employee who I'd known forever and a day, and his day job was to create designs for customers, but his customers were actually our sales staff. So a sales staff person would say, I met with this customer. This is their problem. What do I tell him? And it was Jeremy's job to come up with an answer to that. And Jeremy had a time management strategy where he would deal with whatever was most important first. And he was stuck trying to sort out what was most important after he listened to everybody else. So he had 3 salespeople who were working for me at the time that were basically his customers. So he'd have to listen to sales guy A, sales girl B, and sales guy C and say, okay, it looks to me like sales girl B's issue is the most important, most time sensitive. So I'm going to work on that first. But he told me one day, he said, the exception to that is when you call me up and do something. Say to do something, because I always have to take whatever you tell me to do. I have to put that at the top of the list. And he says it's aggravating. And as I think about that, life is a lot like that. So many of us don't get it, but our health is much like the boss who calls us up and get us to do something. Most of us ignore our health because we feel like we can get around to it. We can do it later. We can address it when we retire or something like that. And truth is, if you don't have your health now, you're probably not going to have it in the future either. Like, how many people do you and I both know who retire, who end up watching episodes of Matlock for a living, or they retire and all they can do is go on cruises and stuff because they've let their bad body go to the pot. So in general, the one thing that I say doesn't give, the one thing I generally don't compromise is some kind of fitness related activity. So even if all I can do is go for a walk, I will make sure that that sticks through no matter what. And the stuff that I do to make money, I typically either ask others to do it. That's why I was the CEO for so long. My employees have always known how to make money at least as well as I do, because my success was contingent on their success. So I was very much motivated to train them as best as I could. So the one thing I was probably most willing to give up, shift around, were any business goals. So if I had a business goal of X dollars of revenue or whatever, and a life event goes, I was very quick to abandon that goal. That was probably the one I was willing to give up first. And then everything else was more of a juggling act. As a parent, you don't get to prioritize how much your kids need you and when. School calls and so-and-so's got a tummy ache. Well, that means whatever you're doing is now formally over. You're about to get in the car and drive to go pick them up at school. And that's pretty non-negotiable. So those
Yes.
interruptions, like those prioritize themselves.
Yes. And if you have your priorities, then the decision-making process becomes easy. I like how you said, like, there's some stuff that you're willing to give up, or maybe it's the one thing, it's the business revenue that you were just talking about.
Yeah,
I think
for
when
me,
you
that
say,
was an
like,
easy one to say, whatever.
yeah,
If I have a smaller paycheck this month because I was working on so-and-so, it's like, that's fine. I am certain there'll be an opportunity to make that up later, but I won't have a chance to take my kids snow skiing in Colorado later because they're going to get old pretty quickly.
oh yeah, tell me about it. Yeah. And well, it's also the other thing too, if you do it talking about your book or creating content and building out your brand, you can't see those things. That's not a transactional thing of your business, right? Or it might not even be related to your business. And there's so many side benefits to that, that's the long-term thinking. I think what happens is a lot of people, it happens, right? We all do it. You get into the transactional mindset. How can you go drive revenue right now, right this moment? Writing that blog, doing this podcast, starting the transcript of your book, that isn't making you anything today. Now, long-term, long thinking, that could be way bigger. And all of these things that you're talking about is who you are. It's your reputation. It's your beliefs. It's your philosophies. It's your brand, right? And all of that stuff in between it is the content, right? The blog, again, the podcast, this conversation, all of it, the text message, it's the content. Obviously, brand's a big deal, crossing your threshold. You got the website, you have all of these things going on. It's clearly important. It's obviously important to us, but I can tell that people that we work with, when it's important to them as well. Why is brand so important to you?
Brand reminds me of why I did it in the first place. It would have been tempting for me to just sit there and do nothing and just react to the environment, feeling I've done my gig. I've spent the hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers over the years as a result of being CEO and had enough of conflict and not want to have any more of it. But when you create a brand and you see it yourself, it's both a conscious and a subconscious, a reminder of what your commitment to yourself is. We all know value in life comes from responsibility. I know I'm sounding like Jordan Peterson here for a second, but
That's okay.
the more responsibility we take, the greater value we can find in our own lives. We don't need some extrinsic motivation. It's an intrinsic. We can be self-motivated by the more responsibility we take on, the more we recognize how God has created us, and the more we see what we're good at, and we focus on that and do things to make the world better. That creates a value and a responsibility ethic within us that's irreplaceable. There's nothing anybody can say or do to motivate me more than my own internal dialogue. It's always been true. And I'd say it's true for nearly everybody else as well. When you stare at your own brand, whether it be a color palette, font, a website, logo, whatever it is, there's a moment when you recognize that I created, because that's not only who I am, but it's who I want to be, maybe even who I want to be better at. Like the concept of Threshold Academy is about me trying to see other people get better. And I'm trying to find mechanisms for them to come to peace or come to terms with the fact that their best efforts of doing it on their own have just not worked. One of the more commonplace conversations I have with somebody is they get to know me and see me, and I can see that look on their face, that moment when they recognize that, one, they're overweight, they've heard what I've just had to say, and they have not been able to do anything about it on their own. But at the same time, all they've ever done are fad diets. They've signed up for Whole30. They've gone down some food in a package methodology that is disconnected from the real world. They've got some third-party vendor saying, eat this quantity at this time and everything will be good. Truth is, they haven't figured out how to do it on their own. And they've never had anybody who they've truly just spilled the guts to and say, I don't know how to do it. What should I do? I'm scared to trust somebody because this is a very, very big deal to me. I see that so often, and they, in general, run away. In general, they run away. So I don't get that freedom to mentor people that much on helping them with faith and fitness and food issues, because in general, people are scared to get that help. They're fearful they're going to try again and fail again. I read a piece somewhere that said the average overweight person by the time they're age 40 have been on 30 different diets. Well, that doesn't mean they've given up. It just means that they're looking for something new and different that they currently don't know about. And when I suggest, how about a coach? How about a guide? I've always perceived, I've always prayed, I've always felt that, can't you see me? Can't you see my children and how successful we've been? Wouldn't you like to learn what we've done? And some people say, yes, I would, but it hurts too much. I don't want to go into the suffer zone as much. And some people say, I don't have that kind of time. I recall every time I bump into somebody that says that, I recall Romans 12:1. you a little thing up in front of you. You can read it out loud to the audience if you want to. But it's God's command. He says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So everything in the Old Testament, the sacrifice was a dead cow, a dead something. And we still have that today. When you screw up, we have to offer a sacrifice. You get a ticket for speeding. Guess what? You have to pay money, right? You kill somebody, you steal something, you have to pay by spending time in jail. There's this idea that you are forced to make a sacrifice because of an error in judgment, right? We still have that today. That's how our justice system works. Well, in God's justice system, he can't handle us when we're sinners and we have a crime. The penalty for sin is death. And in the past, that meant you had to take an animal to the temple and kill it. Well, in the future, fast forward to anything from post-Jesus Christ, Jesus was our sacrifice. But there's this little window in the Bible that gets overlooked. And it says, there's this concept of living sacrifice, meaning right now. You have to make a sacrifice right now. And it says, what do you offer? And it says, you have to offer your body as a living sacrifice. Not your time and it's not your money. That's the thing that most people don't get. In the world you and I live in today, when we think sacrifice, we think of our time and we think of our money. God's call to us is to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. People ask me, what WTF? What do you mean offer your bodies as a living sacrifice? And that's what we teach. That's what we coach.
Yeah.
That's my goal, is to teach you what that means and how to do it.
Yeah.
So that really drives me a lot when I'm trying to engage people. I know it's God's command, and I know in general, Christian leadership absolutely sucks at teaching it.
Yeah. Well, this is where the content comes in, right? This is the stories that you're sharing. And if that leads to someone working with you, if you become their coach, their mentor, then terrific. If they go on a trip with you, terrific. If someone just, I think, is listening to you and does something to make a change, I think that's what you're there for as well.
It's all worth it. That justifies this entire podcast.
Yep.
If just one person says, wonder what God says, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
They don't need me to answer that. I mean, this has been answered for thousands of years by many people who come before me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't have a secret sauce. That's my point.
Well, there's no prescription. You brought up Jordan Peterson. I thought it was funny because you started going here. People don't want to have these conversations. And to wrap it back up even more, is you talked about your PTSD therapy. And you willing to talk about these things is such an important part of your recovery that you had to go there. You had to go, like Jordan Peterson would say, to the belly of the beast. You had to go to these dark places to then be able to come out on the other side of it. And I thought that was interesting. You dropped Jordan Peterson in there. And you being able to talk about these things with John, with the people that you work with your family, and with us on this podcast. I appreciate it. I appreciate, like I said before, your mentorship towards our team, your time today, and your stories. I mean, it's important. So thank you, Jeff. And obviously, Threshold Academy, nothing's going to stop what you guys have going on. I know your trips have been canceled because of COVID. Obviously, people aren't traveling outside the country like they could have. I still think you're making things happen. I think you were in Spain and you were sending pictures or videos from the airport. And right, this was kind of like a couple months ago. You're going to keep pushing through, right? You're going to cross your own threshold and you're going to help others do the same. So first of all, anything else you want to finish with, but also let us know, or let the people that are listening know, what's the best way they can learn more about you, take a look at your content, and connect with you.
Well, thanks to you guys, you can just type my name and enter and hit Google and voila, there comes it all. You can find all kinds of stuff. But the main page is Threshold Academy. And in the not too distant future, all the books and writings that I'm doing, if you'd like to download them or purchase them, you can get them just by going to jeffgaura.com.
That's awesome, Jeff. Well, again, thank you for the time. I know we kept you a little bit over. I know you got some places to go. Your schedule's full, but that won't stop you from making up for it. I appreciate it, Jeff.
All right. Thanks.
One of my favorite things about CADSource is the opportunity to chat with amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or visit us at cadsource.com. Thank you for listening to this CADSource production, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time. This episode exists because of CADSource. CADSource is your content team. You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? That's what we do. Content strategy, creation, and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CADSource, we exist to help you create and share amazing content. And yes, you should have a podcast. We'll help you. Learn more by visiting cadscontent.com.